Namaste, beautiful people. It is David Ault, and I want to welcome you to The Gathering. If you're watching this in real time, it's the last day of June in the year 2024. And if we play with the concept of time as a reality for a moment, then we can become fascinated sometimes at the way in which it appears to be moving very quickly, very quickly. And let's use that and say that as we observe the swiftness of the passage of time, that maybe that's a really beautiful prompt to become more and more mindful about how you want to use it, what you want to focus on, um, where you want to direct your energies towards. And I was sitting with that this week and just observing memory. You ever notice how sometimes a memory will be sparked and it's just flying and coming and presenting itself to us to grab at our attention? And the strangest one came up this past week. It had to be probably about 19 years ago. I had moved from Los Angeles to Mobile, Alabama. The joke around that was going from one LA to the other LA, Lower Alabama. And in my 5 years that I lived in Mobile, I came across this very wild, eccentric woman who was a homeopath. She was really good. She had great skills, and she lived outside of Mobile towards the beach area, towards Pensacola. And so when I found her and I started visiting her and using her skills, it was a bit of a trek. And so I would carve out the time and I would drive to her and we would have these sessions. And she had all kinds of modalities and machines, but she had kinesiology skills and she was very, very wise with regards to herbs and their usage. And so I did benefit greatly from what she was able to provide me for a couple of years when I visited her. But one day on this visit, she was doing all of her little intuitive things that she would do, and she stopped. And I believe there was like an electrode that I was plugged into something, and she was like testing pulses and doing all kinds of things that I don't know. And she stopped and she looked at me and she went, she goes, "You were a shaken baby." And it kind of surprised me the serious tone by which she said that towards me. You were a shaken baby. And she started describing some of the residual effects of having been a shaken baby. And I will say, I don't remember that, but I wouldn't question that given the volatility of what transpired in my upbringing. So it wouldn't have surprised me that the powers that be wouldn't have got incredibly rageful or short-tempered with regards to whatever I might have been crying or doing as a child, and I would have gotten shaken. But it was just the commitment and the energy by which she directed this new awareness at me that kind of took me back. I don't remember any of the rest of the session, but I do remember the ride home. So remember, it's kind of a bit of a trek, maybe like 90 minutes or so. And I'm driving back from that Alabama shore back into Mobile, and I'm getting very, very caught in this awareness and this information. So much so that I call someone, I call a friend, and I'm telling them about my experience. And I'm watching as I'm telling this story about how emotional I'm getting. Like, oh my God, I was a shaken baby. And and then all of the sudden, I can't explain it. All of the sudden I went, wait a minute, wait a minute. That was then, this is now. And there was this unique moment of clarity. And I'm not even going to say where that skill came from to arrive at this decision point. But in that decision point, I go, I don't need one more title to latch on to. I don't need one more thing to call myself or one more label to identify as, because you know what? The truth is, it doesn't serve me. So what? I was a shaken baby. If I was a shaken baby, so far, so good. I'm okay right now. I'm okay, and I'm seemingly thriving, and I'm moving forward, and I'm able to function with some semblance of contribution to the world. I don't need to now go and dwell and create a big story out of this. And in that conversation with that person and with myself, I just said, okay. And I didn't cling to it. I didn't establish some new identity or use that as fuel in order to engage and tell another story about me. I wish that I could say that I was as successful in not creating labels and identities from other memories and awarenesses as I was in that moment. But I was thinking this week, I got to give myself some credit. I didn't like go and walk around and like write books about being a survivor of being a shaken baby. And I'm not making light of our human story. I'm not. I'm just giving you an example of what can happen sometimes when we start to cling very tightly to identifications. And if you've been following me for any time, you know that we've talked numerous times about what it means to dissolve and let go of identity. Why is that? What's the value of that? I think the more that we become curious and open to what we are, and the best way to describe what we are is true essence, the true essence of life, the true essence of all of that which is creative, creation itself. It's very hard to find words to it because it's beyond words. It's indescribable. And if you and I were sincerely committed to evolution, then we would not want to hold ourselves back by creating an allegiance with one identity after another that stood in the way of claiming ourselves and knowing ourselves as true essence. We would begin to let go of clinging and identifying to memory and even thought, and we become this channel or this vessel by which all of that which is indescribable, the power, the unconditionality of love, the inherent wisdom that is there, and it then sort of uses a body to express. It uses you and it uses me, and that becomes uh, what I would believe and have and am experiencing on some level the most optimum way that we can navigate and be of benefit to life is to not saddle ourselves with any kind of limiting force, even a good story. And so, of course, I'm guilty of saddling myself to good stories. Of course, I use those stories as illustrations. And the paradox is that what I'm learning is we don't sweep every story and every label under the rug. But here's the thing, and I want you to hear me. We cling less tightly to them. We cling lightly to them. Because if we're gripping those things, then here's what takes place. And it's kind of like the three C's. So the first one is that the more identity I cling to, the more I crave identity, craving. We start to crave all of the attention and all of the reciprocal nature of identity because we realize that identity in and of itself is very hollow and it won't feed the satisfaction now that is instilled in us, this hunger. So we will have to keep building and shifting and morphing all of these identities in order to stay relevant. So craving then becomes something that we will never be able to satisfy. The other C is that we are caught. It's like putting shackles on our own ankles of our true essence. It's as if we are painting ourselves with the colors of finiteness rather than allowing the infinite nature that doesn't need to earn, it doesn't need to cajole, it doesn't need to manipulate because it just is. So we're craving and we're caught. And the third C is that if we're craving and we're caught and everything around us is sort of is not it's lawful, right? Lawfulness builds upon itself. It's a sort of cause and effect reality. Then the creative force, the third C, the creative force has has only um, its usage through this lawful nature to continue to build name and form. It's a Buddhist tradition, name and form. And so we are caught in the naming and the forming. We have to name and form and name and form. And when we name something, the form happens. And when we name something, the form happens. And oftentimes in the naming process, we are naming unconsciously. We are calling things good or bad. We are calling things limited or unlimited. We are calling things worthy or unworthy. We are calling things us and them. And we are stuck in this name and form cycle of dualism. And none of those things, none of those three C's really continue to peel away the potency of our true essence. And so there's something to say with the process of very gently, very lightly letting go, holding lightly all of the labels and all of the stories. And is everybody ready for that? Are you ready for that? Like a complete wash over of letting go of all labels? Most likely not. We tend to be creatures of process. We can we it is unlikely that we're going to go from 0 to 100, with 0 being completely dense and asleep in our labeling and our clinging, to 100% being free of all of that. And yet the reality is that what absorbs this process again is nothing more than true essence. And so we are asleep in the infinite and maintaining some sense of absurd finiteness within that. And so we wake up when we wake up. We wake up in the speed by which we wake up. And what's curious about waking up or reawakening is that the more that you and I do it, the more seemingly faster it is to hold things lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. And so wherever you are in the process, if there's a story, you're a shaken baby, or you're this, or you're that. I remember one time a man coming and visiting a center, the center that I had in Mobile, Alabama. He was a cancer survivor, and we talked about his journey. But then he had business cards printed, and the business cards were his name and then cancer survivor. And there was a commitment there to this particular form of labeling. And again, I didn't have enough skill back then to go, are you sure you want to do that? But in hindsight, when I think about that, we all are metaphorically walking around with business cards that have our labels on them, the labels of wounding and the labels of creativity and profession. Again, neither right nor wrong, but you have to see at some point, when will you and I ride that horse as far as it wants to be ridden before we can then let that go? And I would trust that in that man's world, that story, um, he took it as far as he could take it. I remember a story of a woman whose the medical periodicals did show that she had gone through this metamorphosis in a true remission of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And so much of her life had been about talking about this. And then it reached a point where she didn't want to talk about it anymore. Something must have happened in her evolution where she realized that there was now life beyond that experience. Do you see what I'm saying? It's not about making our stories wrong, but it's just about becoming more and more mindful to how might holding and clinging tightly to the story could be limiting you. Do you really need another identification? Or are you at a juncture in your life where you're ready to begin to sort of shed those things? That's what the great teacher Ram Dass was talking about with regards to his phraseology of becoming nobody. But you can't really start genuinely in the process of becoming nobody, of relinquishing all of these things, until you sort of really wear out your somebodyness. And so I tell you this today only to begin to consider clinging lightly, consider holding more lightly all of the labels of self and other, the othering, the selfing, to begin to cling lightly to them. I think one of the things that also sort of drove this home was there was a video about some company or a person who goes in and cleans houses after people have passed away. A lot of these houses are of people whose offspring or relatives were not interested in their belongings. And he pulled back a shower curtain. And in the shower curtain were just from the bottom of the tub all the way to the ceiling, garbage bags filled with photos and photo albums that nobody in the family wanted. Those things were snapshots of memories and stories and things. And it was quite something. There was a like a somberness to the observation of that photo, realizing that that also will be mine. No one's going to want my photos. Nobody's going to want all of the knickknacks. And when I say nobody, I'm being general, but you understand what it is that I'm explaining here, right? That that what holds meaning to you, what holds meaning to me, does not have the same relevance of meaning. So then meaning is conceptual. And in this passage of time, half a year of 2024 has already gone by. What would it be like if you lent yourself into a genuine fascination of unburdening, of unloading, of lightening up labels and stories? Noticing that what the energy behind telling it is really wanting is some form of craving. The habitual nature of telling it might be something that indicates that you are caught. And if we never disrupt that cycle, then the creative force will only continue to bring more and more things to name and form, name and form, name and form. And I don't know about you, but I become more and more fascinated with the lightness, the paradox of the lightness, particularly when the outer world seems to get more dense. I become fascinated by how do I move in that density, be an offering to the world, but not at the same level of the density. How do I find a way to continue to show up more and more, but from a place of lightness rather than a place of labeling, a place of story, a place of identification? To become curious to see what would it be like to be more and more available to the infinite nature of solution, rather than structurally showing up over and over again with, okay, this is the way it's got to be. Okay, this is what we did in the past. Okay, you start to see all of this is lending itself to lightening up, lightening up, which seems absurd when the voices and the noise of the world tell you you must be even more concerned. Again, I say this almost every week. It does not mean that you are burying your head in the sand. It means that you are learning. I am learning. We are learning and lending ourselves to a way of being in the world that is beyond anything we've ever dreamed possible. Not from a place of ego, not from a place of power, but from a place of healing, from a touchstone of remembrance of being the true essence. May we continue to practice. May you actually take this week that's coming up and think of a story or a label or a memory and go, what would it be like to let that go? To just sort of walk that to the curb and put it in the recycling bin and let it go. I'm going to practice. Hope you will too. Much love. Till next time.